Monday 9:15 a.m., downtown Houston. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, ran the room from the head of a glass table while Margaret Whitaker, my mother, set her handbag in the center like a claim. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, held a clipboard at the doorway. Linda Park, the escrow officer, placed a deed on the glass so the embossed notary seal faced me. Rank was public. I stood off center and let the seconds pool. By Wednesday night, the seal would matter. The smell of toner sat in the air. Lorraine, my aunt, adjusted her bracelet. She said, "Sign, then go?" Margaret, my mother, eased the deed toward me. She said, "Standard form?" "Quick, Richard." Mr. Delgado, the manager, scanned the first clause. He said, "Durable authority is referenced here." Linda, the escrow officer, tapped the raised seal once. She said, "Notary imprint present." Pressure was staged for witnesses. I turned the deed 90 degrees until the margin squared with the table edge. The embossed circle rubbed under my thumb with a fine grit. The texture was proof against ink, a ridge line that did not lie. I read the signature block, then the recording line, then the small font where broad power hid behind clean spacing. I read from the bottom up, because traps sit low. If I signed here, the house was gone. Lorraine, my aunt, leaned an inch over the glass. She said, still stalling. "Always weaker." Diane Mallory, my sister, slid in with her phone already filming, the lens held high like she owned the light. She took a position where reflections caught my face and the seal together. A man at the counter raised his brow and looked away, the quick kind of judgment meant for people who fold. They filmed my surrender. Margaret, my mother, nudged a pen into my reach. She said, "Keep it small." Linda, the escrow officer, set a blank note beside the deed. She said, "You can reserve concerns here." Mr. Delgado, the manager, stepped one pace closer, even. He said, "He decides his pace." Waiting was my weapon. I brought the pen to the line and rested the tip without pressure. I let Diane have that frame. I let Lorraine have that breath. I angled the page so the seal's shadow cleared the signature space. Microspaces told me which clause had been moved. The line below rode wider by a hair. The date stamped to the right sat one day early. The initials at the bottom used a curl I never used. Every word erased my savings. Lorraine, my aunt, pointed at the witness field. She said, "We all have places to be." Margaret, my mother, folded her hands to hide the shake. She said, "Sign, then go?" Mr. Delgado, the manager, watched the date line. He said, "If the date is off, we pause." Linda, the escrow officer, kept her tone flat. She said, "We can confirm today." A desk lamp flickered once, a clean mechanical blink across the glass. No one pretended not to notice. Diane tilted the phone for the strobe and smiled to herself, wanting an ending on camera. I rotated the deed back toward me and lined the seal's outer ring with the corner square of the page. I let the seconds cut them. Lorraine, my aunt, tried a softer pitch. She said, "Sign, then go?" Family first. Margaret, my mother, kept her eyes on my hands. She said, "Not required to drag this out?" Diane, my sister, lifted her chin toward the notary seal. She said, "Looks official to me." Linda, the escrow officer, glanced at the font widths. She said, "This line is spaced wider?" One stroke, and Galveston was lost. I set the pen down parallel to the margin and took the reservation sheet. I wrote a single line in plain words: discrepancy in date and spacing, 24 hours needed to check notary log at Harris County, custody of document to file. I did not accuse. I preserved. I placed my driver's license by the sheet without being asked. Paper hides the hand. Mr. Delgado, the manager, nodded to Linda once. He said, "Copy that note for file." Linda, the escrow officer, brought the reservation under the glass lid. She said, "Acknowledged." Lorraine, my aunt, did not move her shoulders when she spoke. She said, "This is routine?" Diane, my sister, lowered the phone a fraction. She said, "Still stalling?" Silence wins more inches. I reopened the deed and read every third word down the paragraph that mattered. The authority language reads smooth, too smooth. The spacing confessed what the sentence refused. The raised seal under my thumb felt like a mile marker on a road I had driven for 20 years. My knuckles pressed white against the glass edge until the cold steadied my hand. A chair squeaked once, too loud for the room. Margaret, my mother, watched the man at the counter pretend to study a brochure. She said, "Stop making a scene." Lorraine, my aunt, flicked her bracelet into the light. She said, "Sign, then go." Mr. Delgado, the manager, squared his shoulders between Diane and Linda. He said, "He reads the lines?" I picked up the pen and made the smallest beginning stroke where a signature would anchor. Diane's lens leaned in. Margaret breathed out too quickly, tasting a wind before it landed. Lorraine held her breath like a gambler who wanted to see the river card. I completed the one stroke, lifted the pen, and slid it back from the line by exactly 2 inches. I replied, "I don't sign fraud." Lorraine, my aunt, blinked hard once. She said, "Shameful?" Margaret, my mother, pinched her lips into a line. She said, "You stall again?" Diane, my sister, spoke to the phone as if it were a friend. She said, "He loves drama." Mr. Delgado, the manager, lowered his clipboard and made it plain. He said, "He decides his pace here." By Thursday morning, someone wouldn't sleep. Linda, the escrow officer, placed the stamp device near the reservation line. She said, "I can log a hold request." Lorraine, my aunt, didn't look at the device. She said, "There is no hold?" Margaret, my mother, leaned toward Linda, sweetening the voice. She said, "When it's clear?" Diane, my sister, turned her camera back to my face. She said, "Everyone signs sometime. Not my hurry. Not my loss." I slid the reservation sheet fully under Linda's hand. I recited my birth year for the record and let her copy the number from my license. I looked at the embossed seal one more time, not at Diane, not at Lorraine. The seal was a quiet hill. It didn't brag. It didn't forget. A man at the counter shifted his weight. Lorraine, my aunt, tried to reclaim center. She said, "Sign, then go." "Be done." Margaret, my mother, added the smallest sigh on purpose. She said, "You're wasting the family's time?" Mr. Delgado, the manager, glanced toward the hallway. He said, "We have others scheduled soon." Linda, the escrow officer, waited for one word from me. She said, "Proceed?" Every witness saw the circle. I answered with a nod and nothing else. Linda pressed the stamp down once beside my note. The device clicked and left its rectangle in fresh ink. The noise was modest, the meaning was not. Diane's hand trembled and steadied. Lorraine's bracelet lost its sparkle because her palm lay flat. Margaret looked at the table and nowhere else. By Friday morning, records would speak. Lorraine, my aunt, pointed at the deed again, the gesture tighter. She said, "Release the page." I kept my voice level. I replied, "This page stays in file." Mr. Delgado, the manager, didn't hesitate now. He said, "File retains custody." Diane, my sister, finally lowered the phone enough to meet my eyes. She said, "We're not done?" I closed the deed, opened it, and closed it for the last time. On the last closure, the embossed seal sat on top, proud and still. Linda slid the copied reservation sheet into a plastic sleeve and indexed it for the drawer. The room had the quiet of paperwork choosing sides. No one moved toward the pen. No one spoke. They thought the trap was closed. I locked it on them. Records desk waits at 10. Monday 9:40 a.m., Midtown Escrow Office. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, arrived first and claimed the middle seat with a leather folder while Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, took the end and faced the door like it was a stage. Linda Park, the escrow officer, placed a new packet on the table so the embossed notary seal faced me. Status was arranged before I sat. By noon, a phone would ring. The smell of citrus cleaner hung in the room. Margaret, my mother, pressed the leather folder flatter. She said, "Standard form?" "Quick, Richard." Lorraine, my aunt, traced a price line with one fingernail. She said, sign, then go. Linda, the escrow officer, squared the packet to the table edge. She said, title needs initials on page 3. I stood a step back and let the clock talk. The wall clock in the hallway ticked clean through the open doorway, a metronome for control. The seal sat proud in its circle, slightly off-center, as if someone reset the page to show it more. Diane Mallory, my sister, leaned against the frame, her phone ready high. They pushed the clock. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, entered behind Diane and stayed by the door. He said, we'll keep it orderly. Lorraine, my aunt, didn't look at him. She said, routine, Richard. People are waiting. Margaret, my mother, slid the folder toward me. She said, we finished today? I lined the packet with the table, corner to corner, until the laminate tab brushed my thumb. The tab's edge felt slightly rough, a factory burr that told me it was new. The seal's ring lived a fraction higher than typical, crowding the witness line. Fonts confessed, spacing confessed more. I read the bottom first. If I signed here, the house was gone. Diane, my sister, raised her phone until the lens found my face. She said, he's still stalling. Margaret, my mother, softened hers but kept the message. She said, keep it small. Linda, the escrow officer, offered a pen across the glass. She said, just initials to confirm receipt. I took the pen and held it over the initials box. I did not press down. I counted 2 ticks of the hallway clock because 2 ticks make people breathe. Lorraine exhaled through her teeth and looked past me at the manager, hoping for help that wouldn't come. Delgado stayed neutral by staying still. They wanted the frame of surrender. A shadow passed across the frosted glass panel near the hallway like someone paused, listening. The hinge of the outer door whispered and shut. The door closer ended with a soft hiss, a sound that always ends choice for a second. No one spoke while that hiss finished. Waiting was my weapon. Lorraine, my aunt, leaned forward, diamonds bright under the fluorescent bars. She said, sign, then go. Margaret, my mother, folded both hands on the leather. She said, still stalling? Always weaker. Linda, the escrow officer, did her job without joining us side. She said, we can log any concerns on a separate note. I placed the pen on the glass, parallel to the packet's edge, and took the blank note. I wrote one line in neat block letters. Notarized seal is offset. Spacing differs from standard. Need 24 hours to confirm notary ledger at Harris County. Document custody stays in file. I slid the note back. Every word was a trap. Mr. Delgado, the manager, nodded once toward Linda. He said, copy and file. Linda, the escrow officer, lifted the packet gently by the corner. She said, I'll make a copy for each party. Lorraine, my aunt, blinked twice, then pressed again. She said, sign, then go. I kept my place by the chair and didn't sit. The laminate tab's rough edge bit my thumb again when I turned the page for Linda to copy. The seal caught a strip of light and threw a small ridge of shadow across the witness line. Small lines tell big truths. The hallway clock ticked twice more, hard. They counted the seconds. Diane, my sister, followed my hands with her camera. She said, he loves the spotlight. Margaret, my mother, lowered her voice, public but sharp. She said, you're wasting the family's time? Mr. Delgado, the manager, placed himself between Diane and Linda's copy station. He said, let her copy first. I lifted the pen again and lowered the tip to the initials box. I made a light stroke, enough to start the shape that would satisfy a screenshot, then I lifted the pen away. Diane had her moment, Margaret had her breath, Lorraine had her tiny win that wasn't won. I set the pen down flat. I replied, routine ends with me. By Wednesday, ledgers would decide. Linda, the escrow officer, returned with the copy set, each page clipped, my note on top. She said, here are the duplicates with your comment recorded. Lorraine, my aunt, pointed at the seal's ring. She said, the seal proves it. Margaret, my mother, pushed the copy stack toward me. She said, sign receipt at least. They wanted 1 foot inside. I read the receipt line by line. The receipt didn't admit consent, it admitted transfer of paper presents. Words matter more than boxes. I initialed that receipt and dated it because records love clean moves. Diane stopped filming long enough to check the time on her phone like she had a lunch reservation with my mistake. Paper hides the hand. Margaret, my mother, smiled without warmth. She said, "See? That wasn't hard." Lorraine, my aunt, opened her palm for the pen. She said, "Finish the deed." Linda, the escrow officer, stacked originals beside the copier. She said, "We place originals in the file until confirmed." The smell of citrus cleaner rose again when Linda wiped the glass. The room paused. The hallway clock answered. Lorraine's lips made a small line. Margaret's fingers pressed on the folder until the leather creased. The seal faced me again, now slightly smudged by the copy process, still raised, still honest. That smudge would matter later. I had a memory tied to that ring. Years ago, at an insurance audit on Kirby Drive, I spent a long afternoon comparing claims with mismatched stamps. The raised ones forgave nothing. Flat ones lied to cameras but not to fingers. My foreman said nothing and let me run. We saved a shop from a forged release that day. The owner sent a thank you card. He underlined the words, "Embossed impression," twice. They thought I forgot that lesson. Diane, my sister, returned the phone to record again. She said, "We're going to be here all day?" Margaret, my mother, tried gentler, which never worked on me. She said, "When it's clear?" Lorraine, my aunt, used volume over reason. She said, "Sign, then go." Not my hurry. Not my loss. Linda, the escrow officer, set a small date stamp near the packet. She said, "I can stamp the whole note and route to file." Mr. Delgado, the manager, checked the hallway once and returned. He said, "Keep it moving, but clean." A man in a blue UPS jacket passed the frosted panel and slowed for a second like he heard something he shouldn't. His shadow moved away. The door closer hissed again when he left, that soft drag that makes people decide. No one took the pen. They wanted me first. Margaret, my mother, turned to me with her old Sunday voice. She said, "Family first, Richard?" Lorraine, my aunt, switched to ice. She said, "Sign it, or we escalate." Diane, my sister, swung the lens to catch Linda's hands. She said, "He hates responsibility." The hallway clock ticked into the next minute. Linda pressed the stamp on my whole note, the rectangle blooming in wet ink. Sound followed silence the way it should. Lorraine exhaled too fast. Margaret stayed still and watched for my shoulder to drop. I let the seconds cut them. By Friday morning, records would not bend. Linda, the escrow officer, read the whole note aloud to the room. She said, "Offset seal, spacing anomaly, 24-hour verification, custody retained." Mr. Delgado, the manager, looked at me, not through me. He said, "You keep your inch." Lorraine, my aunt, put both palms on the table. She said, "You embarrass us." I kept my tone flat. I replied, "Shameful is forgery." Silence held for a clean count, then the hallway clock answered again. The seal's edge caught my thumb one more time. Its ridge felt like a boundary set in metal. The citrus cleaner scent faded under the heat of bodies and nerves, but the room stayed professional because Linda and Delgado kept it that way. They had the deed. I had the dates. I pushed the receipt copy to Margaret and kept the original in Linda's stack. I slid the pen back to the far edge of the glass and left it there like a cooling tool. Diane lowered her phone and finally met my eyes without the lens between us. She didn't like what she saw. No one moved. The stamp tapped once, the room breathed once. They set the closing. I froze the escrow. Archive boxes wait at 11. Monday 11 a.m., Harris County Records. Linda Park, the escrow officer, led the way to a side room while Margaret Whitaker, my mother, claimed the chair by the only outlet, and Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, stood in the doorway like a guard. A gray box with property deeds waited on a cart. Status was set before the lid moved. By Wednesday evening, ledgers would speak. The smell of archive dust hung in the air. Linda, the escrow officer, read the pull slip twice. She said Box 416, Beach Parcel. Margaret, my mother, slid her purse onto the table space. She said, make this quick? Lorraine, my aunt, tapped her nail once on the card handle. She said, we close on time today? I angled the gray box so its label faced me square. The corners had new tape over old, a story in glue and dust. Diane Mallory, my sister, leaned against the jamb with her phone already set. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, stayed just inside the door, hands behind his back, present without comment. They wanted speed, not truth. Linda, the escrow officer, pinched the metal latches and lifted the lid. She said, I'll place folders flat. Margaret, my mother, watched my hands, not the papers. She said, don't make this bigger. Lorraine, my aunt, held her place near the threshold. She said, standard form stands. I let the gray folders breathe on the table for one count. Paper shifts when it leaves a box. Edges reveal if fingers rushed. The top folder wore an embossed notary seal near the corner. The circle rose under my thumb like a speed bump on a private road. Raised print tells on liars. One divider was wrong. Linda, the escrow officer, set the first folder open. She said, deed, affidavit, notary page. Margaret, my mother, pointed to the signature line. She said, that's her hand? Lorraine, my aunt, positioned herself to see my face. She said, sign, then go? If I signed here, the house was gone. I touched the seal again, just enough to feel the ridge. The texture matched the last copy at escrow, but the spacing didn't. The witness line hugged the circle tight, no breathing room for a standard font. Fonts drift, seals don't. Diane's lens drifted closer, searching for a tremor. They needed my shake on camera. Mr. Delgado, the manager, moved a half step between Diane and the table. He said, give space to the records. Linda, the escrow officer, pulled a second folder. She said, same parcel, earlier amendment. Margaret, my mother, leaned in with a softer tone. She said, when it's clear? I lined the two notary pages side by side, edges square. One seal climbed the corner. The other sat lower, centered clean above the witness line. The same name, two placements. The dates were cousins, not twins. A dehumidifier in the hall sat silent. No hum, no comfort, just dust and eyes. Every word was a trap. By Thursday morning, a key would matter. Lorraine, my aunt, tried volume instead of reason. She said, still stalling? Always weaker. Margaret, my mother, lowered her gaze to the floor. She said, family first, Richard? Linda, the escrow officer, kept her tone neutral and clear. She said, we can request a notary ledger? I let the silence sit until the fluorescent tube overhead flickered once and steadied. The light's brief pulse made the raised seal throw a taller shadow against the page. Linda's hand paused above the third folder, waiting for a cue I didn't give yet. Margaret rubbed her thumb along her purse strap and checked the time. They wanted the room to vote. I kept my voice flat. I replied, I don't sign fraud. Linda, the escrow officer, opened the third folder slowly. She said, prior quitclaim, 2 years back. Margaret, my mother, glanced at Diane's phone as if it could help. She said, enough checking? The embossed seal on the quitclaim felt different under my thumb. The ridge was lighter, the paper thinner. The circle bled ink in one spot where a printer failed the truth. Raised lines should not bleed. The date format shifted from month/day/year to month written out, a small vanity that liars adopt when they forget their own habits. That date would sink them. Mr. Delgado, the manager, weighed his words and used few. He said, we log anomalies. All of them. Linda, the escrow officer, reached for a date stamp by reflex. She said, I'll stamp the pull sheet. Diane, my sister, lifted the camera higher for the sound. She said, get the stamp on record. Silence held for one breath. The stamp came down once on the pull slip, a deep thud that belonged to rooms like this. The sound pulled eyes. Lorraine blinked, Margaret's mouth closed. Diane's phone framed the stamp like a trophy. My thumb stayed on the seal's ridge until the paper warmed. Silence wins more inches. I had a memory tied to that circle. 10 years ago, a roofing claim crossed my desk with a perfect seal, too perfect. The ridges felt smooth like paint, not pressed. I held the page over light, and the shadow line stayed flat. We denied the claim and moved it to investigation. The contractor's truck sat on a used car lot a month later. He waved when I drove by. He knew exactly why. They thought I missed that echo. Linda, the escrow officer, slid the quitclaim closer to me. She said, "Look at the witness initials." Margaret, my mother, shook her head, small and private. She said, "It's all routine?" Lorraine, my aunt, tapped the card again with impatience. She said, "Sign, then go." Waiting was my weapon. I traced the witness initials without touching them. Same letters, different pressure. One line carried speed, the other had a tremor that belonged to habit. People can mimic shapes, not their breathing. The seal's ridge under my thumb anchored the moment. In men's rooms like this, small facts beat loud orders. An index label had new glue. By Friday morning, custody would change hands. Mr. Delgado, the manager, pressed a finger on the pull slip. He said, "Note the seal position." Linda, the escrow officer, read my face, not my mouth. She said, "You want the ledger?" Margaret, my mother, moved the purse a fraction closer to the files. She said, "Keep it small?" I stepped backward like I would leave. Lorraine straightened, ready to celebrate a fold. Diane lowered her phone for 1 second to text the group chat that I finally broke. Linda waited with the third folder open, the perfect angle to hand me a pen. I reached for it, then set it back. Paper hides the hand. Linda, the escrow officer, pivoted the folder toward her instead. She said, "We request the ledger now." Mr. Delgado, the manager, nodded once at the door. He said, "I'll call records next desk." Lorraine, my aunt, couldn't hold the line. She said, "You embarrass us." "Not my hurry. Not my loss." The fluorescent light flickered again, a single blink that made everyone glance up. The room reset in that heartbeat. Linda wrote the ledger request number on the pull slip, neat and square. Margaret stared at the raised seal as if height could force consent. The dust smell grew when the box caught the air again. They wanted me cornered by time. Linda, the escrow officer, turned to me, clear and steady. She said, "Do you add anything?" I kept it simple. I replied, "The seal sits wrong." Mr. Delgado, the manager, repeated the line for the file. He said, "The seal sits wrong." Diane, my sister, tried for one last dig. She said, "Even interns decide faster." I let the words land and did nothing with them. Linda placed the quitclaim on a blank sheet and traced the seal's circle with her pen cap to mark position. She measured the gap to the witness line with a plastic ruler from a drawer, the kind you get free at Home Depot fairs. They called it routine. It wasn't today. I took out my small field notebook, the one with grid lines and a clipped corner. I logged 3 lines: date formats differ, seal positions differ, witness pressure inconsistent. I added the ledger request number. I signed only my own note. Then I closed the notebook and kept it visible on the table. One stroke, and Galveston was lost forever. Margaret, my mother, tried to reset the tone. She said, "We can fix language." Lorraine, my aunt, aimed at pride, not facts. She said, "He's afraid to lead." Linda, the escrow officer, didn't lift her eyes from the file. She said, "We wait for the ledger?" Silence took the room for a clean 3 count. The stamp thudded again, once, this time on Linda's notation copy for routing. That single sound pushed the next minute into place. Diane's phone recorded a frame with my hands still and the raised circle clear. Small scenes decide big weeks. I let the seconds cut them. I moved the 2 notary pages an inch apart and left them there for everyone to see. The raised circle on one page sat high, proud and neat. The other crowded the witness line like a rushed imitation. The texture under my thumb told the truth twice. No one argued with a ridge they could feel. No one spoke. The stamp thudded. The room held its breath. They loved the signature. The font betrayed them. Notary logs meet daylight tomorrow. Tuesday 10:05 a.m., a notary suite off McKinney Street. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, stood by the copier bank while Linda Park, the escrow officer, set a fresh form on the glass. Paul Henderson, the guard, took position by the door. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, and Margaret Whitaker, my mother, came in tight behind me. Status was clear before anyone sat. By noon, one call would matter. The smell of citrus cleaner hung over the counter. Paul, the guard, tilted his head toward the lobby. He said, "Keep it orderly." Mr. Delgado, the manager, nodded at the scanner station. He said, "We'll image each page." Linda, the escrow officer, aligned the document carefully. She said, "Notary page goes first." I set my wrist on the cold glass edge and squared the form. The embossed notary seal rose from the corner like a small hill, hard under light, certain under skin. Diane Mallory, my sister, hovered at the threshold with her phone. Her lens hunted for my hesitation. A shadow paused on the frosted glass, then slipped away down the hall. They wanted a fold-on camera. Lorraine, my aunt, adjusted her bracelet with practiced flair. She said, "Sign, then go." Margaret, my mother, gave me the pen without a smile. She said, "Standard form." Mr. Delgado, the manager, kept his tone even. He said, "We follow sequence here. If I signed here, the house was gone." Linda, the escrow officer, lowered the lid and pressed. "Scan," she said, "first pass, then verify." Silence held for one breath. The wall clock ticked once. The scanner whirred, hiccuped, and choked midway. The light bar froze in place beneath the seal. A rubbery rasp followed, then a stubborn stop. Linda lifted the lid half an inch, saw the corner caught, and exhaled through her nose. Paul's radio remained silent. He watched the hallway, not our faces. The machine had chosen a side. Lorraine, my aunt, aimed for volume over substance. She said, still stalling. "Always weaker." Margaret, my mother, tried the soft edge again. She said, "Keep it small." Mr. Delgado, the manager, leaned to the panel. He said, "Clear paper, restart." Waiting was my weapon. Linda, the escrow officer, lifted the page gently by the corner. She said, "Seal lip snagged the track." I felt the raised ridge under my thumb and kept my hands off the glass. The seal sat higher than on yesterday's copy. Its circle crowded the witness line. Fonts move, stamps don't. Diane's camera crept in, hoping the jam meant fear, not physics. The wall clock ticked again, slow and indifferent. They needed my flinch, not facts. Mr. Delgado, the manager, glanced at me before speaking. He said, "We can call this a hold?" Linda, the escrow officer, reset the angle 2 degrees. She said, "One more pass." Paul, the guard, shifted to block Diane's shoulder. He said, "Give room to process?" I nodded once, nothing more. The lid came down. Linda tapped the green key. The bar crossed the seal clean this time, then the feeder caught the second page. The screen blinked to a blue dialogue as if nothing had happened at all. Machines behave, then betray. People do the same, just slower. One stroke, and Galveston was lost forever. By mid-afternoon, a ledger would arrive. Lorraine, my aunt, watched the light bar die. She said, "See? Routine." Margaret, my mother, tapped the pen on the table. She said, "Sign, then go." Mr. Delgado, the manager, didn't look away from the image. He said, "Hold on that." The preview showed the raised circle as a bright halo, but the date format on that page didn't match the amendment we pulled yesterday. Month name here, numerals there. Same witness initials, different pressure. The blue progress bar finished and hung, like it wanted permission to move. Every word was a trap. Linda, the escrow officer, steadied her voice. She said, "We log differences now." Paul, the guard, kept his palm near the door push. He said, "Quiet in the hall?" I set the pen down where Margaret had placed it, then slid the page beside yesterday's printout from my folder. Seals at different heights, Witness line crowded here, clean there. The cold glass edge steadied my wrist as I squared both pages. You can stage a signature, you can't stage a ridge. They wanted speed, not accuracy. Mr. Delgado, the manager, reached for the desk phone. He said, I'll ring HPD non-emergency. Lorraine, my aunt, blinked as if she misheard. She said, police? Absurd. Margaret, my mother, softened her tone, not her intent. She said, when it's clear? I replied, routine ends with me. Linda, the escrow officer, wrote a docket number on the routing slip. She said, imaging complete, ledger requested. Paul, the guard, eased the door shut against lobby noise. He said, we'll keep this room calm. Silence took the table for 2 beats. The wall clock ticked back in. I remembered a storm year at the office, flood claims stacked to the ceiling. A contractor's invoice came with a seal that looked pressed but felt flat. I held it to light, the shadow never rose. We denied that bill and called it in. A month later, the truck wrapped with his logo sat stripped behind a chain-link lot off I-45. He didn't wave that time. Paper hides the hand. Linda, the escrow officer, slid the form back toward me. She said, acknowledge receipt, not consent. Margaret, my mother, saw the opening and pushed. She said, sign, then go. Lorraine, my aunt, gave Diane a nod toward my face. She said, get his yes. I lifted the pen as if to write. Lorraine straightened in victory. Diane's phone edged closer. Margaret's fingers tightened on her purse strap. I set the pen on the blank line, then moved the paper an inch to reveal the seal height to the room. I didn't write a letter. I let the seconds cut them. Mr. Delgado, the manager, kept the desk phone to his ear. He said, HPD? Non-emergency. Real estate office. Probable forgery. Linda, the escrow officer, summarized into the receiver when offered. She said, seal position mismatch, date format inconsistency. Paul, the guard, placed a hand flat on the glass. He said, documents stay here. By Wednesday morning, custody would shift. The sound in the suite went thin as breath. The clock paused between ticks, or maybe my ear did. Then the scanner's fan spun down and clicked off, leaving the room without machine cover. Diane lowered her phone and looked at me instead of the screen. For once, there was nothing to narrate. They had the pen. I had the dates. Lorraine, my aunt, tried a new angle. She said, you embarrass us. Margaret, my mother, slipped volume under concern. She said, family first, Richard. Mr. Delgado, the manager, let the piece land, then placed it aside. He said, the process decides here. Linda, the escrow officer, pulled a slim black book from the drawer. She said, Notary Journal, last 2 months. I watched her thumb the pages to the week that mattered. Names, dates, numbers, a clean grid of habit. The entry for the quitclaim carried a registration that matched the lower seal position, not the crowded one. Same notary name, same handwriting, 2 different placements. Habit always finds its groove. Not my hurry. Not my loss. Paul, the guard, cracked the door an inch for air. He said, they're here? 2 HPD officers stepped in without show. One stayed near Paul, the other joined Mr. Delgado at the imaging screen. No hands on holsters, no voices raised. They wore the room like another suit you put on for paperwork. Linda kept the journal open in her palm, a steady platform for straight lines. They brought pressure today. I brought time instead. Mr. Delgado, the manager, gestured to the preview image. He said, height difference on the seal. Linda, the escrow officer, pointed to the journal entry. She said, log supports the lower position. HPD officer, calm and direct, logged the basics. He said, we'll file a report. I held my spot by the glass and said less than I could. The cold edge under my wrist had done more work than any voice. Lorraine stared at the journal as if print could bend. Margaret stared at me as if time could. Diane finally lowered the phone into her jacket, the lens empty for once. They counted the seconds. I used them all. HPD officer, still low-voiced, confirmed next steps. he said, documents stay with escrow. Mr. Delgado, the manager, signed the custody slip. He said, imaging restricted until review. Linda, the escrow officer, capped the pen, slow and neat. She said, we'll copy for counsel only. I set the 2 pages apart so the difference stayed obvious without a word. The raised circle on one page had room to breathe, the other pressed down where it shouldn't. The citrus cleaner smell had gone flat. The room had its own weather now. Paul kept his hand near the door push, not on it. Silence wins more inches. HPD officer, precise as a tape measure, set the bag open. He said, seal the originals. Linda, the escrow officer, slid the form into the sleeve. She said, journal photo next. Mr. Delgado, the manager, read the report number aloud. He said, case 2149? I met Lorraine's eyes long enough for the message to carry. You can move noise, you can't move a ridge. Margaret closed her purse without looking at me. Diane checked her screen and found nothing worth posting. The clock ticked once more, breaking a small, shared silence we all felt. No one spoke. The scanner light died, the room held the pause. They called it routine. The notary log disagreed. Tonight, Briggs reads everything. Wednesday, 7:45 p.m., a small conference room at Howard Briggs's office. Howard Briggs, my attorney, had the long table and the wall screen. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, and Margaret Whitaker, my mother, took the seats nearest the contract. I stood at the end of the table with the copies I had made. Rank in the room was obvious before anyone spoke. By morning, a key would matter. The smell of stale coffee lingered from the lobby. Howard Briggs, my attorney, opened the blue folder flat. He said, we walk page by page. Lorraine, my aunt, slid the contract toward me like bait. She said, sign, then go. Margaret, my mother, added pressure with a calm face. She said, standard form. If I signed here, the house was gone. The embossed notary seal on the signature page rose under light. Its circle cast a small shadow at the corner of the witness line. I laid yesterday's scan beside tonight's original and squared both edges to the table. Fonts can pretend. Seals don't pretend. Diane Mallory, my sister, hovered beyond the glass door, half hidden by the frame, her phone angled for my hands. They wanted evidence of my surrender. Howard Briggs, my attorney, pointed to the date string. He said, month spelled here. Numerals there. Lorraine, my aunt, waved a wrist like any difference was petty. She said, keep it small. Margaret, my mother, set a pen in front of me. She said, sign, then go. I replied, I don't sign fraud. Linda Park, the escrow officer, had sent over a courier sleeve. It lay under the screen like a quiet witness. The seal on tonight's page pressed higher than the one I scanned in Tuesday's suite. Same notary name, same reg number, different ridge position. The legal pad under my forearm felt rough, like a reminder to keep to friction, not speed. One stroke, and Galveston was lost forever. Howard Briggs, my attorney, tapped the copier beside the credenza. He said, fresh pass, same page. The room settled. For a breath, nobody moved. Howard fed the signature page into the tray and pressed. Start. The machine took the sheet, paused too long, then threw up a small, flat beep. The feed didn't resume. The thin screen showed. Jam at exit. He pulled the back door, eased the page free, and held it to the light. The seal glare returned a white rim. The ridge rose like terrain again. The beep cut through our quiet. Lorraine, my aunt, tried to turn jam into shame. She said, still stalling? Always weaker. Margaret, my mother, pushed the pen closer again. She said, sign, then go. Howard Briggs, my attorney, stayed slow and exact. He said, we log variances now. Waiting was my weapon. Diane's reflection ghosted the glass. A second shadow stood with her for a count and drifted away down the hall. Perfume trailed late, the kind that arrives after its owner. Lorraine tracked my eyes, not the paper. Margaret watched the pen, not my face. Howard's hands placed tonight's page and yesterday's printout into a straight, unforgiving grid. They needed speed, not accuracy. Howard Briggs, my attorney, pressed the copier lid again. He said, "One more pull, clean exit." Lorraine, my aunt, couldn't resist another jab. She said, "Shameful?" Margaret, my mother, lowered her voice to sound helpful. She said, "When it's clear?" The copier took the page and finished without complaint. A fresh image slid onto the output tray. I set it by the others and studied margins as if they owed me rent. The date line sat 3 millimeters left on one, 2 on the other. The witness initials pressed into fiber on one, rode the ink on the next. Raised circles don't move across paper unless the hand applying them changes. Every word was a trap. Howard Briggs, my attorney, lifted his eyes at me, not them. He said, "We mark the ridge height." Lorraine, my aunt, let annoyance show. She said, "Not required." Margaret, my mother, reached for the contract again. She said, "Sign, then go." I slid the pen away from my side of the table. Then I drew a thin pencil line across a transparency sheet and laid it over both signatures. The circle on one page kissed the line, the circle on the other swallowed it. Same seal name. Different pressure. Different placement. The room stayed quiet long enough to feel like respect. Silence wins more inches. I remembered my first year in audit, a supervisor named Keene who ran his finger along seals like a blind man reading a map. He said nothing for most of a morning, then pointed at one deed and put it aside. The ridge felt wrong to him, too smooth, too even. We pulled the notary log and found a date, made 3 weeks late. The county clerk called within days, not weeks. Keene didn't teach with speeches. He taught with inches. Paper hides the hand. Diane, my sister, slid the door open 6 inches and framed me with her lens. She said, "Say you agree?" Lorraine, my aunt, took the opening. She said, "Sign, then go." Howard Briggs, my attorney, took the opening back. He said, "He decides his pace. Not my hurry. Not my loss." I lifted the pen again and let the camera love it. Lorraine leaned forward. Margaret pressed both hands flat to the table. Diane raised her phone to catch the moment clean. I set the pen down on the blank line and didn't write. Instead, I drew the transparency inch by inch until the circle misaligned in full view. They filmed my refusal, not surrender. Howard Briggs, my attorney, pulled 2 highlighters from the credenza. He said, "Yellow for fonts, pink for seals." Lorraine, my aunt, tried to laugh. She said, "Cute." Margaret, my mother, reached for the pen once more. She said, "Sign, then go." I replied, "Routine ends with me." Howard highlighted the date formats. October 12, 2024. On one. October 12, 24. On the other. He marked the witness lines. One hand showed pressure into fiber, the other floated above it. He circled a registry reference printed in a font that didn't exist in last year's notary kit. The room gained weight by ounces, not pounds. By Friday, records would decide. Diane, my sister, lowered the phone an inch, not a mile. She said, "Even interns decide faster." Lorraine, my aunt, flicked the contract edge as if scolding it. She said, "Sign, then go." Howard Briggs, my attorney, capped the highlighter carefully. He said, "We hold, then notify." Not my hand. Not my choice. Not my future. Lorraine's lips thinned where filler didn't reach. Margaret's bracelets stopped their small rhythm against the table. Diane's phone found my left hand resting on the legal pad, not shaking. Howard typed a clean summary line for counsel copy only. He didn't pad the sentence. He didn't need to. They pushed the listing. Title pulled the brake. Howard Briggs, my attorney, looked at me, not over me. He said, "Your call on release?" Lorraine, my aunt, tried one last frame. She said, "Family first?" Margaret, my mother, gave the same words news sugar. She said, "Don't make this bigger." I set my wallet on the table and slid out my driver's license. I held it over the signature block long enough for Diane's camera to track it. Birth year, name, address. The facts that didn't bend. I put the license back and moved the contract away from the blue folder. One signature would erase me. Howard Briggs, my attorney, opened a fresh envelope with a thumb. He said, "Originals go sealed." Lorraine, my aunt, reached before he finished. She said, "We'll take copies." Margaret, my mother, tried another soft angle. She said, "When it's clear?" Howard sealed the attorney copy and labeled it for morning review. Then he lifted the courier's sleeve from escrow and checked the chain of custody tag. The texture of the manila flap under his finger looked like sandpaper made polite, firm, not flashy. He held the contract above the envelope mouth for a beat that felt deliberate. The room went very quiet. The copier beeped once again, a single, clean note for "Ready." We all looked at the machine as if it had spoken. Diane's phone hung in midair. Lorraine's fingers stopped their reach. Margaret's shoulders dropped half an inch. The sound felt like a stamp in a different language. I let it sit there until it faded. They brought pressure today. I brought time instead. Howard Briggs, my attorney, took the contract out of Lorraine's reach. He said, "Custody with counsel tonight?" Lorraine, my aunt, couldn't shape a reply. She said, "Margaret, my mother, found the oldest line in the book." She said, "Family first?" I moved the blue folder to the center of the table and turned it so the last page faced me, not them. Diane's phone caught my knuckles, not my eyes. I took the empty courier envelope from the credenza and placed it beside the contract like a second path completely closed. No one moved for 3 breaths. Howard tipped the envelope upright as if to pocket it. The flaps slipped from his grip and fell flat on the table. Paper on wood, unhurried and final. Lorraine flinched. Margaret blinked. Diane stopped filming. No one spoke. The envelope fell and stayed there. They loved the signature. The font betrayed them. Tomorrow, the key moves. Thursday, 9:30 p.m., our small kitchen felt like a waiting room. Claire Mallory, my wife, stood by the counter with folded arms. Sophie Mallory, my daughter, sat at the table with her phone face down. A sealed envelope with an embossed notary seal lay between us like a dare. The balance in the room leaned against me until someone spoke. By dawn, the record would lock. The smell of rain on hot concrete drifted in from the driveway. Claire Mallory, my wife, looked at the envelope once, then at me. She said, "Open it now?" Sophie Mallory, my daughter, kept her voice steady. She said, "We can film if needed." Linda Park, the escrow officer, had texted that a courier was en route. The sleeve had arrived 10 minutes later, signed, "Received," by Sophie's neat hand. I ran a finger along the raised seal without breaking it. The ridge pressed up through the paper like hidden wire. One cut in the wrong place, and they'd say I tampered. If I signed here, the house was gone. The door from the garage sighed behind me when it shut. The closer let out a soft, long hush that lasted a heartbeat and was gone. Claire glanced at the hinge as if it had spoken a warning. Sophie angled her chair to see both the counter and the hallway. Small, ordinary movements, but the room kept its edge. They needed me sloppy tonight. Claire Mallory, my wife, stayed practical, not soft. She said, "We label as received?" Sophie Mallory, my daughter, slid a sticky note forward. She said, "Time and initials, Dad?" I wrote the time then. RM. Small and square. The texture of the key in my pocket felt sharper than usual, each notch like a tooth. I set the note along the bottom flap and pressed once with the ball of my thumb. The ridge under the seal did not give. I let it be. Paper keeps better when you let it breathe. Waiting was my weapon. Diane Mallory, my sister, called while the envelope lay untouched. She said, "Still stalling?" "Always weaker." Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, chimed in seconds later on a group text. She said, "Standard form? Sign, then go." Margaret Whitaker, my mother, added a line meant to sound kind. She said, "When it's clear?" I replied, "Routine ends with me." Sophie turned Diane's thread face down without reading the rest. Claire kept both palms braced on the edge of the counter, like she was holding it in place. The house had never felt large, but tonight every corner looked farther away. A shadow paused under the front door's frosted glass, then drifted on. No knock came. No voice followed. They watched for a misstep. Linda Park, the escrow officer, called as the rain eased off. She said, "I need confirmation of custody." Claire Mallory, my wife, lifted the phone to speaker. She said, "We have the envelope sealed." Linda Park, the escrow officer, came in clear and clipped. She said, "Note Ridge height. Check date formats. Don't break custody." I replied, "Recorded and time-stamped." Sophie tapped her notes app and read back the courier receipt. The number matched the one on Linda's email from an hour earlier. The last 4 digits of the related file lined up with yesterday's scan. I took out my driver's license and propped it by the envelope for a photo. The rain smell stayed faint, like a reminder that outside had its own clock. They wanted speed, not proof. Howard Briggs, my attorney, had suggested a trick years ago. Put a plain transparency over suspect documents. Draw a thin line through key marks. See what lines kiss and what lines float. I pulled the transparency from my work bag and slid it over the seal without touching the wax. The circle half swallowed my pencil line. Yesterday's circle had kissed it. Same notary name, same registration, 2 different ridges. Every word was a trap. Claire Mallory, my wife, shifted to the practical again. She said, "You place it, not me." Sophie Mallory, my daughter, leaned forward, eyes bright but steady. She said, "We do this slow." I replied, "We do this clean." I set the envelope gently into a clear document sleeve, then sealed the plastic mouth. The key in my pocket pressed against my thigh, a steady weight. I took it out and laid it near the envelope without letting them touch. Steel and paper, side by side, both asking for control. I chose the order and kept it simple. By Friday, custody would not bend. A memory crept in while the house held quiet. Years back, I watched my grandfather's key press into a tin of fishing lures at his small house in Galveston. He didn't talk much, he catalogued by touch. He ran a finger over the notches like reading a note in a ledger. The lures stayed put, not because he hid them, but because he tagged them in his head. "Keep a list," he had said once, "and no one moves you off your spot. Paper hides the hand." Linda Park, the escrow officer, returned to the call after a pause. She said, "HPD logged your report? Hold stands tonight." Claire Mallory, my wife, kept her voice level. She said, "We understand. We wait." Diane Mallory, my sister, couldn't leave well enough alone. She said, still stalling? "Always weaker." I let the seconds cut them. A second message pinged in from an unknown number, but Sophie didn't open it. She set the phone face down again and nodded at me. Claire poured water into 3 plastic cups from a 7-Eleven run earlier. No ice. No talking. The house made its small noises, all of them ignoring us, and we ignored them back. Silence wins more inches. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, finally called direct, not through Diane. She said, "Keep it small, Richard." Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, sent a photo, the beach house porch. She said, "Buyers will walk?" I replied, "Not my hurry. Not my loss." The porch photo had a date overlay from last month. The cushions were different, the light wrong for that hour. Stock decorators love clean lines and cheap throws. The house looked like a catalog, not a home. They had planned the sales story, not the ownership chain. They counted on signature, not on ridge height. By morning, the counter would shift. Claire Mallory, my wife, picked up the key and held it to the light. She said, "We pair it once? Then lock." Sophie Mallory, my daughter, slid the sleeve toward the hallway safe. She said, "Camera on?" Chain of custody in frame. I nodded and opened the hallway closet. We had mounted a small home safe there after a break-in years ago. It was not a fortress, just a metal box that asked simple questions every time. "Are you ready? Are you sure?" The safe's keypad waited in clean silence under the dim hall lamp. One stroke, and Galveston was lost forever. Claire Mallory, my wife, took the camera roll without flourish. She said, "Recording? Time, address, names?" Sophie Mallory, my daughter, held the sleeve at the edges. She said, envelope intact? Seal unbroken. I replied, key present. Document sleeved. I keyed the code with 2 fingers and pulled the handle. The door swung open without complaint. Inside lay our passports, the title to our truck, a box of photos Sophie had saved after her grandmother's fall. I cleared the top shelf with a quick hand and made room for the envelope and the key. Steel shelf. Clean felt pad. No loose receipts. They filmed my discipline, not fear. Linda Park, the escrow officer, stayed on the line. She said, place the envelope first. Claire Mallory, my wife, nodded toward the space. She said, then the key on top. Sophie Mallory, my daughter, kept the camera steady. She said, ridge visible? Label visible. I set the sleeve inside and squared it to the back. Then I laid the key across the top of the plastic so the notches ran perpendicular to the seal's ridge, 2 different languages crossing in one box. Control above intention. Metal over paper. Choices stacked, not scattered. They pushed broad authority. The clause stopped it. Diane Mallory, my sister, made one last try from her end. She said, this hurts, mother? Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, went for the last stage line. She said, family first? Margaret Whitaker, my mother, softened to a whisper that carried fine. She said, be reasonable? I replied, I don't sign fraud. The hall lamp flickered once and steadied, a quiet electric shrug that let us know the grid still owned the night. Claire's hand paused over the stop button, then dropped to her side. Sophie exhaled slow and held focus. My thumb found the safe's bolt without looking. The steel knew where it lived. One signature would erase me. I closed the safe door to 2 inches and waited. The house went still as if listening for next steps. The garage door closer whispered again when the night air shifted, a soft hush that was there and gone. I pressed the door shut until the edges met. The metal bolt seated with a solid clunk. No one moved. No one coughed. No one spoke. They sent the courier. The recorder held custody. Recorder desk waits at 10. Friday, 10:20 a.m., Harris County records put us under bright lights. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, stood nearest the recorder desk with her chin up. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, stayed half a step behind her shoulder, both hands on a stiff purse. Diane Mallory, my sister, watched me like she was waiting to post the first clip. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, stood by the wall with a thin folder under his arm. Linda Park, the escrow officer, held a tablet and a legal pad. Paul Henderson, the guard, kept to the doorway. 2 HPD officers waited near the corner glass. Naomi Green, the journalist, checked her phone, then lifted a small notebook. The unequal rank in the room favored their noise more than my paper. By noon, 1 key would move. The smell of burned office coffee hung flat near the tray. Howard Briggs, my attorney, set our clear sleeve on the table. The envelope with the embossed notary seal sat inside it, ridge unbroken. The simple house key crossed the sleeve at a right angle, teeth clean. Linda read off the courier number, then my initials, then the time. Each line matched. Small lines hold big weight. I let the moments spread and did not fill them with talk. They wanted a rush, not a record. Naomi Green, the journalist, angled her phone slightly away. She said, this on the record? Howard Briggs, my attorney, kept his tone neutral. He said, we're documenting sign-in only? Paul Henderson, the guard, shifted his stance just once. He said, keep the aisle clear. The vent's low hum wrapped the room but did not change it. I placed my driver's license beside the sleeve for scale on Naomi's photo. The raised circle under the envelope edge felt like a small ridge of coin. Texture tells more than ink. I tapped the ridge once and stepped back so Linda could snap her own picture. They had the deed. I had the dates. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, pushed a clean printout forward. She said, standard form? Sign, then go. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, tried to soften the shove. She said, when it's clear? Diane Mallory, my sister, let hers land hard. She said, still stalling? Always weaker. I replied. I don't sign fraud. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, opened his thin folder. He said names, parcel, date. Read them slow. Linda Park, the escrow officer, kept her finger on a line. She said, notary name and registration number next. One signature would erase me. The overhead light nearest the door flickered once and steadied. The HPD officers didn't move. Their body cams were small and black, quiet eyes that remembered for other rooms. Naomi wrote 2 words and then looked up at me. I kept my hands flat and empty on the table. A pen lay within reach, blue cap off, ready to trap a hand. They set the closing. I froze the escrow. Howard Briggs, my attorney, laid 2 printouts side by side. He said, compare the seals. Linda Park, the escrow officer, leaned in just far enough. She said, ridge depth is off. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, tapped the corner once. He said, fonts differ on the acknowledgement. Waiting was my weapon. The HPD officers took a step closer to the table, still outside the imaginary ring the recorder staff liked to keep clear. Paul Henderson kept one hand near his radio but left it alone. Naomi framed the ridge with her phone without getting too close. The ridge on our envelope caught light like a tiny ringed hill. The forged deed seal sat shallow, plainer, like someone pressed a stamp through cloth. By lunchtime, someone would step back. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, aimed straight for my face. She said, don't make this bigger. Diane Mallory, my sister, edged in with the echo. She said, sign, then go. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, tried a coaxing turn. She said, keep it small, Richard. I replied, routine ends with me. Linda Park, the escrow officer, found her entry in the notary list. She said, ledger shows no stamp that day. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, looked to the HPD officers. He said, this triggers a report. The nearer officer, badge above a plain collar, kept it even. He said, we'll bag the forged pages. Every word was a trap. A small memory cut in while the room held. Years back, at a DPS counter, I watched a clerk reject a form for a barely slanted seal. People groaned behind me in line. I asked to see the ledger entry and saw the same number used twice. The clerk froze, then called a supervisor. Sophie got her license a week later, and the office replaced the faulty stamp. Little ridges move big doors when you hold them up to light. Paper hides the hand. Naomi Green, the journalist, shifted to the recorder clerk. She said, is received stamped publicly? The recorder clerk, a quiet woman with a date stamp, nodded once. She said, after custody is set. Howard Briggs, my attorney, turned a page to the mortgage writer. He said, look at the middle initial. Linda Park, the escrow officer, pointed at the handwriting in the margin. She said, that's not his hand. If I signed here, the house was gone. Diane Mallory, my sister, reached toward the pen as if to hand it over. She said, here? Be useful once. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, pushed the forged set an inch closer. She said, a simple mark? I picked up the pen and held it over the line. The room leaned forward with their hope. I let the pen hover and counted 3 slow seconds. Then I set it down on the table without touching the page. Linda did not nod. Naomi did not blink. The HPD officers did not shift. I let the seconds cut them. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, slid a clear ruler across the forged seal. He said, circle misaligned by 2 millimeters. Linda Park, the escrow officer, ran her finger to the acknowledgement. She said, witness name misspelled. Howard Briggs, my attorney, lifted the forged deed by 1 corner. He said, registration number transposed. The room went quiet enough to hold a breath. The recorder clerk brought the evidence bags closer with a smooth hand. The first HPD officer read a string of numbers while the second wrote them. Naomi glanced from her notes to the shallow seal and back. Diane's jaw tightened once and then she masked it. Lorraine touched the corner of her earring like it could buy her 6 more minutes. By the hour's end, titles would lock. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, tried a last soft shove. She said buyers will walk. Diane Mallory, my sister, went to the old card. She said shameful. Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, tried to make it mercy. She said we'll all move on. I replied, not my hurry. Not my loss. Howard Briggs, my attorney, set our original ridge under the overhead lamp. He said, note the depth under light. Linda Park, the escrow officer, lifted her tablet for the image. She said, custody shows intact. The overhead light chose that moment to flicker once, then steady again. Not a threat. Just the building reminding us the grid is bigger than our names. Naomi raised her eyebrows at the little stutter and jotted a tiny note. Paul adjusted his foot half an inch and stopped. One stroke, and Galveston was lost forever. Naomi Green, the journalist, set her pen down a second. She said, do you regret not signing? Lorraine Whitaker, my aunt, answered on cue for me. She said, he'll regret it by sunset? Naomi Green, the journalist, looked to me and waited. She said, your answer? I replied, I don't sign fraud. The first HPD officer lifted the forged set into a clear bag. The second peeled the white strip and sealed it with a slow, exact motion. The recorder clerk lined up her date stamp and pressed down once on the custody form. The thud landed square and final. Lorraine's mouth snapped shut. Diane pulled her phone in and held it low. Margaret braced both hands on the purse and held still. Silence wins more inches. Linda Park, the escrow officer, addressed the recorder desk. She said, escrow hold continues pending verification. Mr. Delgado, the real estate manager, looked toward the HPD officers. He said, you'll notify county records? The first HPD officer kept it even. He said, report filed. Custody sealed. Howard Briggs, my attorney, turned to me with a steady nod. He said, the ledger will carry this. By afternoon, one door would shut. Diane Mallory, my sister, tried one last angle at my dignity. She said, even interns decide faster. Naomi Green, the journalist, didn't look at her. She said, the ledger shows the pace. Margaret Whitaker, my mother, gathered her purse handle tighter. She said, Richard, be reasonable. I replied, I am. Howard Briggs, my attorney, slid the safe key back to me. He said, keep it on you. Linda Park, the escrow officer, tucked the image under a case number. She said, photos attached to the file? Paul Henderson, the guard, opened the door 3 inches and waited. He said, aisle is clear now. The recorder clerk raised the stamp again for our chain of custody copy. The room held its breath between her lifted hand and the table. The air shifted as the door eased wider on its hinge. The stamp landed with a clean, rubbery thump that seemed louder than it was. Lorraine blinked hard, then stared at the table. Diane's thumb hovered near the post button and did not press. They brought pressure today. I brought time instead. The embossed notary seal on our envelope caught one more line of light and seemed deeper than before. Not because it changed, but because the forged one finally looked as shallow as it was. I slid the key off the sleeve, then placed it flat on the table next to the stamped custody form. No theater. Just order. No one spoke. They called it routine. The notary log disagreed. They loved the signature. The font betrayed them. Subscribe if you want more stories about real men who don't scream. They act. Coldly? To the end? Which details stayed with you? Would you have stopped there, or gone further? One signature would erase me. I closed the safe door to 2 inches and waited. The house went still as if listening for next steps. The garage door closer whispered again when the night air shifted, a soft hush that was there and gone. I pressed the door shut until the edges met. The metal bolt seated with a solid clunk. No one moved. No one coughed. No one spoke. They sent the courier. The recorder held custody. Recorder desk waits at 10.